Welcome everybody to the 9th FAIR webinar. My name is Jeroen Peters. I'm a senior design researcher at RISE, one of the participants in this project and the moderator of this seminar series. We always have usually at least some new faces within the audience that haven't been part before and may not know everything about the FAIR project. So I'll do a very, very brief introduction to sketch the context a little bit before I hand the floor to Isak and Andreas. Just to tell you a little bit about FAIR. FAIR is preparing the Kvarken region for an early implementation of electric aviation, and it's quite a broad project looking quite exploratively at different aspects, the knowledge base about electric aviation, what possibilities there are from a regional development point of view, but also from a technical point of view. So it's very much a broad exploration looking at what are the first steps we can take towards a rapid introduction of this type of sustainable aviation in the Kvarken region. There's 3 work packages in the project. Work package 1 is looking at the regional effects of electric aviation, worked on by Umeå University, University of Vaasa and Nord University. There's work package 2, looking at guidelines for implementation, run by Biofuel Region with Mid-Scandia. And then lastly, the cross-border innovation process, which this competence network and webinar series are part of, which is run by us at RISE. The project is owned by the Kvarken Council, and of course, project management is with Tyréns, which we will hear more about today. For those of you who are maybe a little bit less familiar with the Kvarken region and the geography of it, it's the narrowest part around the Gulf of Bothnia, the Kvarken region, on the Finnish and Swedish side. And as you can see from this map, also the project has been extended towards the Norwegian side, something we're all very happy with, so that we're covering a broad part of northern Scandinavia. The project is, as I mentioned, owned by the Kvarken Council. It's funded by the Interreg Botnia Atlantica project. But we also have we're also very fortunate to have a wide area of supporters and financiers to the project from public and private sector and different types of institutions that are all engaged within this project, helping us to connect and to understand how to move it forward within this region. That being said, that's a very short introduction about the FAIR project, a bit of the main features, so to say. But today we'll hear a lot more about what has come out of the FAIR project so far from our project management, Andreas Forsgren and Isak Brändström, that work at Tyréns, and they will talk today about the question, why is electric aviation a good fit for this Kvarken region? We've planned about half an hour for the presentation, give or take, and afterwards I will try to moderate a little bit the questions that come up, but we will get there in a little bit. What I forgot to mention is that we are recording today's session, as always, because we would like to publish it and share it for those who were not able to attend today. If this is something that is not ideal for you, please just let us know afterwards, and we can make sure to take you away from the recording. Yeah, that being said, I want to give the floor to Andreas Forsgren and Isak Brändström. Go ahead, guys. Welcome.
Thank you, Jeroen. I'm Andreas.
And I am Isak.
And we will be handling this presentation, and we will be completing each other during it. But I would like first to thank everybody who's been a part of the competence network in the FAIR project. I mean, it's really been such a blessing for us. Initially, we gained so much competence, which we have tried to use in this project. And now we are on the other side. We are transforming, we are gaining knowledge, and we're starting to give something back in the competence networks, and that feels really great to be able to contribute to the electric aviation scene. Then I would also like to just shortly say that we have a final conference plan for the project. It will be the 20th to 21st of September in Skellefteå, physical. But I think it will be a hybrid event, so it will be able to participate digitally as well. Could you please share the presentation, Isak, for me? So hopefully we could go through today's theme. Yes, switch. So the focus of today, we're not only having the pleasure to be acting as project managers and, you know, handling the project and making sure that everything runs smoothly with the work packages, but we also had the opportunity to do research for ourselves. And that is pretty much the focus for today's presentation. And as promised, we will talk about why these thoughts are happening in the Kvarken and the Nordland region. We will also go through why electric aviation is appealing, and in specific to appealing to the region. And finally, after those discussions, we will try to discuss and to take our conclusions to see if electrification in itself will prove a revolution for regional aviation in the Kvarken region. And remember, all about FAIR is that electric aviation is to happen fast. So our conclusions and what we're discussing is really focused on a quick implementation as soon as the technology is available. And slide. So Jeroen really put us on the map already. I would just like to add some short things about the region. It is, of course, a cross-border region. We have big natural obstacles, the sea in the east and the Scans, the mountain range in the west. And the region is also quite well developed if you look at the north-south infrastructure, but the east-west connections are much weaker. The region also are, I would say, a bit blessed in the low carbon energy production from both from hydrogen power, but also big potential for wind power production. And we also see an emerging green industry, a cluster of green industry in the region, in many different steps of different branches. So that's the region. And then straight into the new technology, or electric aviation. And this is the three parts we identify which really is appealing with this new technology. It's increased accessibility, you know, flights travel fast, it seems quite obvious, but we will look into that during this presentation out of the Kvarken region perspective. We will also go into the environmental aspects and what is promised to be a low environmental impact from this new technology when traveling. And least but not least important is the cost aspects and what's being said about lower maintenance, but also running costs for traveling with this kind of technology. So that's the scope of the presentation. And if we start off with, this is a picture actually contributed by Lars Westin, Umeå University, from the first work package in this project. And it's a transport economical picture where we have travel time and travel distance. And what this actually shows is that different travel modes, depending on the transit time to the start of the journey, you see the car starts in the Origo, which means that you have a very short traveling time to your transport mode, while jet air is quite a long traveling to the airport. Usually it takes more time, so you have some kind of time punishment before you travel really fast. And as you see, you get the modes, it's certain competitive ranges in the travel distance related to the travel time to the mode, but also the traveling speed. And in those ranges, one mode is really competitive. And if you try to look at the region, and this is really something we did just a couple of days ago, actually, we got some understanding of, this is travel quotas, or travel quotas, I think it's the right interpretation in English.
Comparison between the travel time for airplane compared to a car.
Yes, so these are the airports, the cities with airports in the region, and the blue ones is Finnish airports, the yellow one is Swedish, and the red ones are Norwegian. So what you try to see is the percentage of time related with flight related to to car actually. And the very dark ones are those which are twice faster or more using a regional aviation option, while the light green ones are in between from twice to the same kind of travel times. And then you have the orange and the red ones, where the car beats, so to speak, the aviation alternative. And what's interesting to see here is that we have made some assumptions where we have a punishment for 100 minutes in total for aviation, and that is transfer time to and from your destination. And then we have calculated with an average speed of 400 kilometers an hour for the airplanes. But in our region, you could obviously see some conclusions, and it's very green, of course. You see that it's increased accessibility in almost all relations. But as you might expect, the longer relations are the most competitive when it comes to aircraft compared to cars. Do you want to add something, Isak, just to bring in?
Now we could just add that the focus of our project is, of course, electric aviation, and we have discussed different kinds of electric airplane models in previous seminars in this series. And I think that, the 400 kilometers an hour airspeed is, I think it's based on around the speed of the Aviation Alice airplane. Yep.
That's a good contribution. But you might see that the aircraft seems to be very competitive in many relations. And this one is interesting because it's the same kind of pictures, but instead of cars, it's rail, high-speed rail, which you compare to. And of course, what you might say is that it seems like it isn't that well developed in the region, the high-speed train lines. But in some relations, they are, and that's not a good fit for electric aviation. You can see, and it's usually intra-national lines such as Vasa-Seinäjoki, for instance, short distances where the travel time punishment really hits the travel times. But you can also see where you have you can also see the effects of a weak high-speed infrastructure for rails, where you have quite good travel quotas in international relations, the very green ones. And so about the environmental impact, so I would just say that it seems like we have some kind of accessibility gains, at least flight is fast, right? But you don't have other options, transport modes, it seems really competitive. So that about that. And then we go to the environmental impact. And this is just a easy comparison we have done. We are also going to we're trying really hard to calculate life cycle analysis, where we include also, the production of the transportation mode, so that we actually get the whole lifespan of the airplanes, the trains, the cars, and such. But this is just based on Nordic electricity mix, and the different load factors for the modes. The footprint, so to speak, the emissions. And what you actually see is that electric aviation with Nordic electricity mix is really also competitive to use. And it's very, very like to trains, high-speed trains and regional trains. So seems like calculated like this, the impact might be quite low. And this is an example. I would also like to say that in different parts of the region, the regional airlines are quite different. In Norway, we have pretty much of regional aviation. In Sweden and Finland, it's quite rare, and very rare if you look on the east-west connections. So this is an example of a regional air route which today doesn't exist. But if it would, we have just calculated some kind of environmental footprint with car compared to using electric aviation. And as you can see, it's quite a big difference when we calculate the emissions in this relation. So in this comparison, it seems like you have a much lower emissions from electric aviation as well.
All right, then we'll move on to the third assumption we had about the lower costs of operating electric aircraft. And to try to understand the effects of this, we have started studying what the airline economics look like today. And then you can see from this pie chart that there are different types of cost items facing an airline, such as the aircraft standing charges, which is basically the costs of owning aircraft. It's the crew cost, the fuel cost, maintenance, airport fees, and indirect costs such as overhead costs, booking, applications and such. But how will this be affected by electric aviation? Well, to start off, we think that electric engines, since they are more efficient than jet engines, you could think that it would lead to lower fuel costs. The electric engines are also cheaper. They have fewer moving parts and they cause less vibration. And therefore, it's also assumed to have a lower maintenance cost for electric aircraft. But as with all new technology, in the initial period, it will be probably small production volumes, which could mean that you lose some of the economies of scale, and the capital costs will be higher initially. They will fall over time, but as Andreas said, we will, in this project, we're focusing on the early implementation. So what we have done is that we have tried these assumptions on and this electric or this fictional electric aircraft route that Andreas showed, Skellefteå in Sweden to Kokkola in Finland. And when we have done that, we have seen that it looks rather promising from an economical point of view. We see that electric aviation in this case is about 5% lower cost per passenger for a new route. But when you are operating a route, you have already an airplane that is already engaged in a route. Then, of course, you have taken into account both the operational costs and the fixed costs of owning that aircraft and all other parts of the fixed costs for an airline. But when you add a new leg to that route, or if you have free capacity with that airplane during the day, then you can, of course, you have already accounted for the fixed costs, and then it's basically the operating costs only that you are looking at. And that seems like there's a bigger difference, of course, because it's the fuel and maintenance costs that we think are mostly affected by the electric driveline. So then you have, in this case, a 27% lower cost per passenger for a contribution route with an electric aircraft. And in this case, I would say that it's hard to say exactly the numbers, but we have based this on a 19-seater aircraft, the conventional aircraft being the Beech 1900, and the electric aircraft being the Heart Aerospace ES-19. But to do these calculations, we have of course, had to do some assumptions. It's been quite hard, I would say, to find the exact numbers for what will the maintenance cost be of an electric airplane that doesn't exist today. I'm not sure anyone really knows, but also just trying to figure out what will an electric aircraft cost compared to a similar model with a conventional aircraft. It's quite hard to find the numbers. So what we have done is we have made assumptions. And And these assumptions you see in the case I described now, we have done this calculation using a analysis tool called RDC Apex that gathers data from, I would say, most of the airlines and airports in the world, with all kinds of data that you can use as a basis for modeling. But then we have made some assumptions ourselves. To start off with, we have assumed a 50% load factor. We have assumed a jet fuel price of 0.7 euros per liter, a charging cost of 0.5 euros per kilowatt hour. And then we also had to make assumptions about the maintenance cost. In this case, we have used I think it's from one of the development companies or the developers of electric aircraft, that they stated that it would lead to about 50% of the maintenance cost of conventional aircraft. Then we also made an assumption that, as I said, with the new technology, it could be that the capital costs are higher. So we increased it by 2 times the aircraft standing charges, just to check what that would mean. So these are the assumptions that you saw in this case. We have done some sensitivity analysis as we don't really know the exact number, and there are a lot of moving parts in this equation. For one thing, the price of electricity, it's all right, we can say the 0.5 euros per kilowatt hour that I mentioned, that is basically the cost of fast charging an electric car in the Nordics today. But what happens if that cost would be double? Yeah, then we see here in the picture that would mean that the electric aircraft then wouldn't be beating the conventional aircraft at the jet fuel price we have stated for a new route, but for a contribution route, it would still do that. And I think the cost of charging is really interesting. It would be, of course, much lower cost if you could slow charge the plane, but you will need some kind of fast charging for quick turnaround times at the airport. And that also indicates that you probably will need or you will face higher grid fees from the power company. So exactly where the cost will be, we don't really know, but we have tried it. And we can try with different values in our model. But on the other hand, it's a lot of focus on the green transition, and a lot of policy is aimed at making carbon more expensive. And what if we double the cost of the jet fuel instead? Well, then, of course, it looks really much better for the electric aircraft in comparison to the jet aircraft. We see that it's about 28% lower for a new route. This, however, doesn't really change the cost for the electric aircraft. It's still the same, but it's the competitiveness of electric aircraft compared to the jet aircraft that is affected. All right, but we could also see if these assumptions about maintenance costs, as we've said, we think that they will be lower, and we have tried it with about 50% lower maintenance costs. But what if it turns out it's not really lower, but it's the same? Then it's also looks like it's I would say for the total economy of this route, the total cost, it will be approximately the same for an electric aircraft as for a conventional aircraft.
I saw a question about the contribution route. You could just explain it a bit closer.
Yeah. All right. So the contribution route is, imagine that you have an airplane. You're already using it during a day. Then you have already accounted for that you need to pay the fixed costs for owning that aircraft, and you need to pay the fixed costs of crew and of the overhead of the airline. But if you add another leg, if you have free capacity in that airplane and use it more during that day, then you can you don't have to account for those costs because you have already done so. So then it's just focusing on the costs of operation for that exact route. Yeah. Then, as I said, we assumed that it would be more expensive to buy an electric aircraft compared to a conventional aircraft, since it's a new technology, or at least initially. But we don't really know that for sure either. I've seen different statements from different electric aircraft development companies that I would say go in a little bit different directions. Some that seem more expensive and some that seem about the same price or even lower price. So if we assume that it's the same price as for a conventional model, then that would mean that the electric aircraft economics would be really looking much greater, of course. So to sum up this first part, I would say that, yeah, it looks like a really promising technology for regional transport. We've seen that it allows for increased accessibility for almost all relations within our region. And with the Nordic energy mix, it's also a really low climate impact. And as we've seen that, we believe that with these assumptions, yeah, it looks like it will be also lower costs for electric aviation compared to conventional aviation.
So, to the later part of the presentation, and when we are trying to sum this up a bit, the question emerges, right, Isak? Will it take off on its own merits? And yes, it seems like that, explicitly where you have existing routes, and because of the higher profit margin or the lower costs, it seems really appealing, right?
Yeah.
But as I said, at least in the Kvarken region, the regional air routes are quite scarce, and there is some doubt from our side if it will emerge of itself. Maybe not, actually. And it really depends on a key question, and that is the demand and the competitiveness of this technology. How well do we have to serve it in order for it to happen, and how will an actor present a new air route for that? It's quite a hard question, actually, and could continue to. But if we go back to the example, Skellefteå-Kokkola here, and we have some kind of price range for electric aviation, I would say, gaining from the contribution low to the whole cost set of 155 euros, between 66 and 155 per ticket. You could try to see, would the public sector need to subsidize in some way, and would there be interest to subsidize in some kind of way? And then you try to calculate time savings, of course, and we have used numbers from ASEC 7. It's numbers used for socioeconomic calculations in Sweden for infrastructure investment and such. And the time saving, as you could see in this example, is about 7 hours. There could be some legs you should add to this. I would say we have presumed half an hour. That's the travel time by air we have calculated, so you could extend it perhaps a bit. But you have time saving of up to 260 euros. And then we could also include the climate aspect. And if you go back to the same numbers we used from the ASEC 7, you could actually calculate in more social gains, the price of emissions of 40 euros. So in total, if you used animation, Isak, you could see social benefits first to up about 300 euros per person. And that is if you have a demand. You could see those, if someone wants to travel in this destination. And what we're actually saying about this, or trying to discuss, is that if you have such a demand, it might be useful for the society to actually make this, in this case, cross-border air route actually happen. So, and if you want to be early, and if you want, specifically I said, you want new regional air routes to emerge, you really need to go back to the airlines and the economical models they operate in. You need to understand them. And you need to understand the risks associated with a new technology and the transfer time between this old technology and the new, and that you need backups in the beginning in order to be able to operate without risks. But you also need to see the need for, which all airlines do, really, the need to actually operate these capital-intensive investments, which an aircraft is. So in that case, also for the regional airlines, you need a network. You need to operate your aircraft. A high utilization is key to lower unit cost and also be able to present lower ticket prices and to be competitive. And then you need to, of course, if this doesn't happen and you still want to be early and the society sees benefits, you need to calculate those. And you need to move forward. And that's the key for in the next phases, like I would say, if you switch to policy measures. If you would take policy measures, I think you need to prove that the society wants you to, or that you have a societal surplus to actually make policy measures. And then something they've experienced, which I have a big understanding that is hard, that is to try to understand the technical specifications of this new technology as soon as possible. And I understand that the startups are, things are happening very fast, but it's key in order to make early policy decision making to increase the knowledge actually, so that we have the right policy measures if you want to be early, supporting an early implementation, and also, harvesting the social benefits linked to this new technology. And then as for the calculations we've done and the sensitivity analysis, of course, the charging solutions are really key. You need to provide cost-effective charging solutions. But capital cost might also be a very important part, and to lower the standing cost, that is the ownership cost, but also the costs of actually owning this aircraft and purchasing this aircraft. And that might be a subsidize of the initial price of the electric aircraft. And then taxation of different fuels. Yes, it might, speed up the move from fossil fuel jets or propellers to electric engines or electric supplied engines in some kind of way. But if you want to create new kind of air routes, and I don't think that is the right policy. It won't support new airlines, but it will shift faster in those existing ones. And then an interesting question, which is really interesting to discuss as well, is seeing electric aviation and comparing it to regional public transport. And as of today, it's in Sweden at least very much a national question. But what is the regional responsibility, or what is the regional interest from the public transport providers?
We could say that the first generation of electric airplanes with the ranges stated and the number of passengers, I think it looks a bit more like regional public transport than the longer route aviation.
Yes.
So it's really a shift maybe. And there's have been a lot of people I know from our earlier webinars also talking about the electric aircraft, maybe like sort of buses with wings or trains with wings in a sense. But then you need to understand that buses and trains are, of course, part of the public transport, and that is that they are subsidized by the public, because we see that the benefits of it is large for society, and we think that electric aviation could play a role in this as well.
Yeah, it's a good comment and a clarifying comment, of course. So I agree. But then again, if you as a region you want to proceed in this and want to actually learn more about it, you need to review the accessibility objectives, of course, of your region, and to integrate aviation as of the other transport modes, I would say, and to try to see the benefits and try to see how does aviation fit your objectives when it comes to accessibility, and how do you actually put it in your portfolio of the public transport system in your region, I would say.
Right. Just that was basically our last slide, and we of course will be here for discussions afterwards. We would also like to encourage you to follow the project if you don't already do that. We have a website, flyfairkvarken.com. We are present on LinkedIn. You can find our email addresses here. And as Andreas said, we will be hosting a conference in September in Skellefteå, Sweden. This picture you see here is part of the project team on site in Skellefteå with the Pipistrel Velis Electro airplane. This December we visited. Really cold, but a beautiful day. Right.
Thank you guys for your attention.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Andreas and Isak. Great presentation, and finished well on time. So we have a bit of time for questions and even discussion if we can get that to happen. I see John already raising his hand. That is how we would like to do it, like this. So if you raise your hand, I can try to moderate a little bit who gets the word in what order. I'll do my best to keep that fair, but then we have the best chance, I think, of starting some discussion and also perhaps some new ideas. John, please go ahead and ask your question, and I'll ask the others to think of questions and raise their hand.
Hi, and thanks for a great presentation. My question is about new routes contra existing routes, and you mentioned that it's easier to start electric flight on existing routes than to start on a whole new route. And I'm not quite sure I'm grasping why that's the case when the investment costs will nevertheless be the same when it comes to electric infrastructure on a new route, so to say, compared to an existing route. Could you explain a bit more?
I think I could start maybe by saying that I think if you have an existing route, you know already the demand on that route, which makes the business case easier to calculate, I would say.
Okay.
Then, in addition to that, I also think that if you have a route that is already operating, then maybe you can have a backup aircraft on that route. Because that is also one thing we've heard from airlines, that when you introduce new aircrafts, regardless of if they are electric or conventional aircraft, there is always a risk that the aircraft will be standing due to some, if something happens to that aircraft anywhere in the world, then they will be standing. So they will need to have maybe a sort of a backup system initially, and I think that could also be a part of the case for already operational routes.
I totally agree. I'm quite happy that you answered about the demand, because that's 100% my opinion as well. You don't really know the demand, and that's been a key question in our project, how to actually learn more about the demand. And that is something we really should focus on learning more about. What's the demand for this new type of transport? Because it's a new type of transport in some kind of way.
And I do have a follow-up question on that, and a good remark, but I was just thinking how to weigh in the different factors. Is the demand and the existing route, and that they already know the demand, does it weigh more heavily compared to the investments that needs to be done anyhow on buying a new airplane and also the infrastructure needs on the airports. How do you weigh those two factors?
That's a good question. I mean, we are trying, when we use the models and we come to this solution, I would say, is that we see on the operational costs and the fixed cost, and we have, of course, made assumptions, but we see cost reductions of about, if I remember correctly, is it 5%, something like that. In the first slide, we showed about the sensitivity analysis. And I think that 5% in airline economics is quite good, actually. So I think that you would move towards this new driveline in that case, at least over some time, because the initial phase is as Isak goes into, the capital cost might be higher, the risk might be higher, so there might be need for policy. It's kind of a good question you're having, and it's hard to give you a really solid answer.
But we have seen it in, I think, for example, in the eastern US, where I think it's Cape Air Regional Airline in Massachusetts, who are making the shift to electric aircraft, and they really have stated, in advance, I would say, but they have stated that they really see that they will be having increased profit margins on their existing routes with this technological shift.
But I mean, we could dig much deeper in this, of course, and we should. We should as a society, I think, as well.
Thanks for the answer. Anyhow, it was interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, we're here for the discussion as well for us too. We are learning, everybody. I think that's really important to stress, that everybody's still learning in this subject.
Sorry, Jeroen, I think you're muted.
Very good. Yeah, my microphone is a bit strange, but no, I can only agree. I think it's great. It's a great forum to share and discuss, and I think that's, for me at least, is the fascinating thing, that we're talking about a technology that is not really here yet, with huge implications on societal, cultural, historical points of view, and we're all just trying to grasp little parts of that to understand what it could bring. Yeah, do we have any other further questions from the audience? We see already from Martijn. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I have a question. Did you also look into the opportunities that other forms of air transport might have, like advanced air mobility kind of solutions, or did you only look at kind of conventional aircraft with an electric propulsion system?
In this case, we've been kind of conventional, right, Isak? But Lars Westin have looked upon some calculation as well for accessibility, rather like eVTOLs, if you're referring to that, I guess. Vertical starting vehicles.
Exactly. That was what I was referring to.
Yeah. And then there is a difference, of course. You know, the transfer times should be shorter to your heliport, which you're referring to instead of an airport, and you could gain accessibility gains, which are much higher, of course. And Lars, I don't know if you want to comment, but you've made some accessibility calculations in a report available at the Kvarken Council website.
Yeah, but otherwise we can say that, yeah, the focus of this presentation a little bit more conventional, but I think that we are perhaps mainly focusing on a little bit longer distances, and the first generation of eVTOLs maybe more focused on more closer to urban areas, but we also think that it could have really interesting applications in regions such as ours as well, with the possibility to land really close to where you want to go. Yeah.
Lars, would you comment a bit on?
Yeah, I mean, that was very much of speculation also, but if you assume that you have a shorter transfer time to heliport for eVTOL, of course, you can reduce the travel time compared to electric aviation also with an eVTOL, and then it's perhaps slower during on the route, so to say, but it will be very competitive in some relations, and for short relations, as we said, if those will be available for roads up to 150 kilometers, of course, they will be quite competitive from a time perspective. Then we have no idea about the cost of.
Good. Thanks for that addition, Lars. Fredrik, you've raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks a lot. Great presentation and also very interesting discussion. Just a few comments. I think that it's correct to put the price tag on time. I think we have to start doing that. I see that we have let's say the hard concrete cost and then the soft cost side of any transport or societal equation. And I don't think we have put enough energy on looking at the softer side. So let's say what is the value to have transport at all? What is the value of have faster transport? But not, I mean, it might be that not everything goes in the direction of electric aviation, but I think electric aviation will stand out as a convenient way to solve some of our transport issues that we have today, because we can get rid of the transport infrastructure or problems on ground, for example, which brings me to the cost of infrastructure. And I think in any model from now on in the future, I want to see that the cost for transport infrastructure has to be part of a model, especially if we are looking ahead. And we know that Trafikverket, the Swedish traffic agency, and in their big infrastructural proposition, which is now being commented, aviation is not part of that, because aviation's infrastructure is not financed usually by the state budget. So this is it's an interesting issue that I think we need to look at as well. But not only the financial cost of infrastructure, but of course also the energy consumption and CO2 emissions related to infrastructural projects. And finally, I think there's still room for discussion in the comparison between traditional aviation and the new era of aviation. I think that during the lifespan of Heart ES-19, we will see a movement towards single pilot operations on certainly shorter routes. There is research going on, and this will likely be something which will be made available and possible first on modern aircraft, let's say, not traditional old aircraft, which is part of this comparison model. Clearly, this is not happening tomorrow, but it will happen in the coming years. Certainly within the lifespan of new aircraft. And another thing is that we should also look carefully at different, the discussions right now in Sweden is focusing quite a lot on different instruments, styrmedel, to promote greener technology and reducing CO2 emissions. And Trafa, one of the authorities, Trafikanalys, is having hearing today and tomorrow about how we can meet our climate ambitions in Sweden. And we're constantly coming back to forbidding short-haul flights instead of replacing other transport modes, for example, with zero emissions short-haul flights as soon as we can. And this is interesting, but what I wanted to say is that when we look at the financial model, we should start to include certain kinds of premiums that will be given to zero emissions vehicles, such as electrical aircraft. Because I'm pretty sure that somewhere in the work with this styrmedel, the economic instruments to promote zero emissions transport, these will be available. So that will also reduce the capital cost and possibly also part of the operational costs. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, great comments, Fredrik. I think we agree to a large extent with what you are saying. And also regarding these policy instruments you mentioned, I think that is also one of the main, hopefully one of the main results of our project is to find these kind of policy instruments and suggest them to those organizations, those politicians who are financing our project as well.
Yeah.
Also like to add, I think it's a great point about the transport infrastructure. That is also something that we will be looking into in terms of carbon dioxide emissions from building the airport infrastructure versus building, for instance, road infrastructure or rail infrastructure. Then you also could look into not only the CO2 emissions, but also start thinking about the biodiversity aspects or the landscape aspects of the transport infrastructure as well. I think those are important points to mention.
I agree. The softer parts are also interesting to discuss, the barrier effects of infrastructure and the landscape impact and such things, which also are part of, you know, the decision material. So I agree.
That's very good comments, Fredrik, Isak, Andreas. I think also one thing that's interesting is that you raised the Swedish discussion, Fredrik, and what is happening with the authorities involved. I think it's also a fascinating part of the FAIR project that we are also have those kind of discussions happening at the same time in some forums in Norway and Finland, and that looking into some kind of alignment going into an uncertain future, but that makes it all the more interesting. So if there is somebody who wants to comment also from that point of view from one of the other countries from within FAIR, I think that would be a very good comment to the discussion. But we see, Hans, you have a question.
Well, yes, actually a comment also compared to what Fredrik had said. I think that we ought to also look in the mirror to see that actually during the 18th and 19th, we had actually regional air travel or air traffic. We had actually Swedair flew from, or Swedline, I think they were called, Skellefteå, Umeå, Vasa, with a 19-seater twin otter. And we have a lot of that kind of traffic in the south of Sweden, but also in the north of Sweden, so to say. And we have it actually in Norway today, although it's mostly PSO, public service obligation traffic in Norway. And this has died due to the cost for operating 19-seaters with turbine engines, which has increased dramatically and made it not cost efficient anymore, so to say. And you see the same thing in US, and that's why Hart now has got, you know, these orders of 200 19-seaters fully electric aircraft from United and from the group that were the Mesa group that were actually the largest operating of 19-seaters in US. And was serving enormous amounts of airports in the US, which has just faded away, so to say. They say that we have the market still there if we can have a good enough solution, and as they are looking upon the Heart, it will be that solution. So definitely it will be, but of course, and then you have to think. I mean, in Norway you have these regional development aspects that you are putting in place, and we don't in Sweden. We have this that the PSO are by our definition in Sweden only a national thing. You are not allowed from a regional level or a municipality level to to make a PSO locally or regionally when it comes to aircraft. You're allowed to do it with buses and trains, yes, but not when it comes to air transport. And you will fit in, because if you look upon this like the FAIR or the Kvarken region or the other regions up here in the north of Sweden, Finland and Norway, we have relatively large distances, but not that large long at least. So there could be some kind of a market that is quite internal. You could have a domestic airline which is a domestic within your county even. You could fly between Umeå, Skellefteå, Storuman. You can go to Hemavan, then you go to Mo i Rana and Bodø and whatever. So and on the other side in Finland. So this is and there is this demand or market that is potential through for instance, the battery belt and so on, a new exchange that did not exist before, but that is growing now. So as I see it, this is the real potential. I mean, this region will be where you could really see this happening if you allow it, so to say, and if you give the possibilities to the region, or that the state defines that, okay, it is in the state's interest or the Nordic interest that we have PSO which are cross-bordering and flying over and so on. So this is, it's a comment from me at least.
Very nice comment, Hans. I don't know if Isak, Andreas, you want, it's almost a very good last comment for today. I don't know, Hans and Isak and Andreas, if you want to go over it once, or
yeah, no, I think it's a good comment. I think really the PSO routes are interesting. Norway is an interesting example, and I think that cross-border PSO routes in the sort of spirit of Nordic, the Nordic Council have stated that, or even the prime ministers of the Nordic countries, that the Nordics is to be the most integrated and sustainable region in the world in 2030. So I think that is a good ambition, but the PSO routes might be a tool to get us there.
Yeah, I would also agree about the history. It's vital to know your history and why the system looks as it does today, in order to learn from that. And we're also looking into that in this project, but more of that another time. But I agree with the historical part Hans said. And of course, the cross-border aspect is very relevant for this project, since it is an Interreg project. So we also agree there.
Great. No, I think it's a pity we're running out of time to discuss this further, but I'm sure there will be other venues amongst them, of course, the final conference that we will have, but also upcoming webinars that you will all be informed about now that you are part of our network. What is lasting for me is to close today's session. I want to thank you all for your participation, especially Andreas and Isak, of course, for their presentation. For Carita, my colleague, for organizing this seminar. If you want to have more information about the seminar series, you can contact her directly. And here are all the addresses for who to contact if you want to get more involved within FAIR. And of course, our LinkedIn pages want to follow for all the necessary information. The date for the next seminar escapes me at this moment, but I'm sure you will all be informed shortly about the next one, and we hope to see you all there. Thank you.